Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Security Spotlight. And today we'll be talking about building a secure and diverse security team. And with me, first of all, I'm so excited about the guest that I have today, Jim Routh, CISO of MassMutual, and Joe Sullivan, CSO of Cloudflare. Thank you both. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Arun.
Thank you.
Great. So before we get into the meat of the discussion about how to build a very strong and diverse security team, Jim, Joe and I recently had a conversation on how CISOs can be good business leaders. And in that conversation, I was picking Joe's brain a little bit on how did he start his security professional journey as well as a security leader journey. And would love to spend a couple of minutes with you, hearing your story and sharing that with the audience, if that's okay.
Oh, sure. Happy to do it. And similar to Joe's background, I fell into security. It wasn't a conscious choice. It just kind of evolved and happened. But I really have my wife to thank for my security career, because back in 1998, I moved my entire family to Minnesota, went to work for American Express in IT. And I did it largely just so I didn't have to travel and I can spend more time with my kids. And I loved it there. Minnesota was wonderful. But of course, I was driving from my home 15 minutes from one heated garage to another heated garage in the winter. And I could go downtown through all the skyways in Minneapolis. And it was, it was a great existence. I didn't really worry about cold weather or anything like that. My wife, on the other hand, she's at home. She's taking the kids to school, picking them up, shopping and doing all that stuff. She's got, little ones. And, it's 30, 40 below during the winter. And so she's getting kind of tired. So after the third winter, one night at dinner, she said, "Look, the kids and I are moving back east. Would you like to come?" And that was the trigger event where I said, "Oh, geez, yeah, I guess I would." And I ended up, I called my boss. I said, "You got to get me out of here." My wife says it's a done deal. So he got me a job, but it wasn't in IT. It was in, they called it marketing behavioral analytics. And there were a bunch of econometricians. And at the time, I was a history undergrad, so I never studied statistics at all. So I had little understanding of what all that was. Of course, today we'd call them all data scientists, but back then we didn't. And so I learned a lot about behavioral modeling, and it turns out that really translates to cybersecurity today. Of course, I didn't know it at the time, but they merged the marketing team and the risk analytics team together. And I reported to the chief risk officer. And because I had an IT background, I reported to the chief risk officer. I knew the card business pretty well by that point. I became the first CISO at American Express, just purely because I think my boss didn't want to give a presentation to the OCC. And so he pointed a CISO to do it for him. So that was my entree into cybersecurity. And I owe it to my wife, Ellen.
That's a great story. I totally agree with your wife, because I went to school in Cincinnati, and coming from India to Cincinnati and the cold, when I moved to Bay Area, I was like, okay, this is new home. I'm not moving to any place cold. So totally understand and empathize with her. Great, thank you for sharing that. All right, so before we get into the aspect of how do you build the team, let's talk about the team itself, right? I talk to a lot of chief security officers, other security leaders, and they all structure their team a little bit differently. And I would love to hear from both of you. How have you approached in the past and in the present of structuring your team, organizing your team? And Joe, I'll start with you and then move to Jim to take his thoughts.
Sure. I started building out my first security team at Facebook. That was the first stop on my CSO journey. And really the first thing I did was start talking to other CISOs. One thing I've learned over the years is that there's a great mentoring community across CISOs. And so I didn't want to try and invent it on my own. I wanted to talk to other people who'd been through it and learn their lessons. So I spent a lot of time on the phone and video conferencing, talking to different CISOs about how they prioritized, how they structured. And you're right, there's not one set whiteboard or blueprint of an org chart of a security team. I think a few factors go into it. One is, what's the mission of your company? What kind of company you're at? What are the, meaning, are you a technology first organization? Are you operations first? Are you infrastructure company? Are you a supply chain company? And so you have to build your team around the demands of the organization and the priorities of the company. I think there are some basic foundational principles in terms of like the technical talent you want to have and having a diverse set of skills and backgrounds.
Great. Jim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Joe. I think the reality is every enterprise is different and has a different risk posture and profile. And so I don't think there's a one size fits all model. As a matter of fact, this is my 6th CISO gig, and I actually have evolved a bit, and I don't have a blueprint that I fit people into. I choose talent, and then I ask that talent, what would you like to learn? And then I create a role to enable them to learn what it is that they wish to learn. So the organization model and the design comes as a result of finding top talent. And I've recruited talent within cybersecurity. I've recruited talent within data science. I've recruited talent outside of cybersecurity. And I've had success in all of that with finding really talented people, diverse kind of backgrounds, and diversity includes diversity of thought. So I came into cybersecurity relatively late in my career, and others can too. I think we can teach a lot of the foundational constructs of cybersecurity. People are much more technology literate today in terms of digital consumers. They kind of understand that security is part of that today, whereas 20 years ago, security was a back office kind of thing that was you check the box for compliance purposes. So fundamentally, I try to find top talent and then give them an opportunity to learn what it is they want to learn. As a result, every 18 months or so, I like to move my direct reports into different roles, because ultimately I'm preparing them to take my job, and they need, an opportunity to do different, have a different functional orientation. And so there's quite a bit of movement in terms of organizational movement. And I'd rather find talent and create a model to support that talent, as opposed to creating a model and then finding talent to support the model.
I agree with, may I jump in for a second, Arun?
Yes,
I agree with Jim on 2 really important points there. The first, I see this real danger in a lot of security teams of siloing. Someone gets on a detection and response team and gets stuck there and doesn't get to understand how application security works, or the data science side. And so on my team, we talk a lot about and try and encourage every member of our team to work on cross-discipline projects and to work on things outside of their zone of responsibility. And I think that's important, not just for kind of like the career development so that they can grow into leaders. They can also find what they enjoy. If you like what you're doing and you feel like you're learning, you have a tendency to run towards it. You dig deeper, you work harder, you get better results, then you get better positive feedback. And it's this virtuous cycle I want my team members to get on. So I totally agree with Jim on those 2 points.
That was a precise point, Joe, that I was going to reiterate, because I have heard you talk about this in mentorship sessions, as well as giving advice to different people, saying like, don't get so siloed into one thing. And in our recent conversation, you had stressed upon that. So it's very great to hear from both of you security leaders about that. And as we shared a little bit of the past in terms of how your careers have started, as security leaders, have you seen that mindset over time change as to how security leaders have been building their teams? And Jim, we'll start with you. What's the mindset that you have seen change in your peer CISO or security leader circles?
Yeah, so what's happened with cybersecurity is it went from the back office to the front office, because in any kind of product or service today with a consumer digital interface, the consumer is sensitive to security because it's a friction point, authentication being a great example of that. And so what you put in place, an enterprise puts in place from a consumer security perspective, isn't in the shadows and not visible, it's visible to them. So it's front and center. And in many cases, it can define the consumer digital experience for the enterprise. So today, stakeholder management is really critical as a skill set for both the CISO as well as the cybersecurity leadership team. And that wasn't a premium the way it is today, decades ago. Today, Joe made the point of every enterprise has a different model, a different attack surface, and a different set of risks to manage. But the business context is what drives the investments and capabilities from a cybersecurity standpoint. And I think that giving people an opportunity to learn and develop how to apply skill or how to apply capability for the enterprise, and then manage stakeholder expectations, not only about what the top cybersecurity risks are at a point in time, but how they change and evolve as the business changes and evolves. And that's constant reminder for the senior business leaders, hey, keep in mind, these are the risks that we're managing. Your job as a business leader is to take risk. Our job is to help you manage that risk. It's not about risk reduction. Risk reduction across an enterprise, I think, is a little foolhardy, frankly, because businesses, especially in high tech, but really in any business today, you got to take risks to survive and to flourish as an enterprise. So our job is really to help business leaders manage that risk with better tools, techniques, and approaches to managing that risk, cognizant of what the top risks are at any given point in time.
Yeah, and so as the security team has moved from the back office to the front and starts to get more attention, that's where I think diversity comes in. The security team now needs to really understand the entire business, and it needs to understand your customers. And that means, and the best way to understand your customers is to represent them and to be and share their backgrounds.
Right.
And so we need to bring together teams of people who can think like our customers all over the world, can think like our customers no matter their background, and can bring their voices into our companies and talk about like how our customers feel about risk. And so I think that's a really important thing that's kind of evolved and become front and center in the last few years.
Right, the business drivers being such a big influences for how they're shaping security and the teams. So let's talk a little bit about building teams. Often when I talk to security leaders, there's always the pain point at cybersecurity skills shortage. And you're always looking for talent. You're always looking for the top talent and building a great team. What are some of the skills and traits that both of you are looking for when you're trying to build a team? A little bit to the structure that you mentioned. I would love to hear what are some of the skills and traits that you're looking for. Joe, we'll start with you and move to Jim.
Yeah, let me start with, I challenge the premise that there aren't enough talented people out there. In every profession, there's a learning process, there's an apprenticeship process, there's a development process, there's a growth process. We as a profession haven't, to the extent that we're challenged on that, it's on us as a profession that we haven't done enough to actually articulate what are the raw skills that we want to see in people coming out of school, what are the things we want for people to make it to the next level. And I think that's fundamentally changed in the last few years. I'm seeing excellent talent come out of college and graduate school programs with a much deeper understanding. I'm seeing people move from different fields into security. Security is much more, like Jim said, front and center for businesses now. And that means there are more people interested in getting in who have strong backgrounds in different areas. And so we as leaders have to look at our job descriptions and the way we think about what we're looking for a little bit differently, and we'll find people who can actually come in and have a big positive impact.
Great. Jim, your thoughts?
I agree with Joe 100%. I'll say this. I only have one thing I look for. I want intellectual curiosity. And the reason that that's important is that's the one thing I can't teach. Can't teach somebody intellectual curiosity. That has to be inherent. And I'll tolerate some quirky behaviors if they have intellectual curiosity. The other thing I look for is diversity, and diversity in thought, diversity in ethnicity, diversity in geography, and just general diversity. And to emphasize Joe's point, I know there's a lot of press about how there are more cyber jobs than there are resources by a factor of 2 or more. My view is I never have any trouble attracting top talent and diverse top talent. So it's and I think all of us as CISOs actually have an opportunity with one of the impacts of the pandemic is enterprises have figured out that people can work anywhere and be successful working anywhere. And the whole notion is of that you can't build relationships if you're not physically close to someone, is kind of been thrown out the window. And the reality is that you can, and you can be successful. It's different. It's more difficult, but frankly, the CISO of today should look at this as an opportunity and say, I'm going to hire people where they choose to live. And by the way, people are choosing different places to live based on their personal needs, their family needs, and not so much about their work needs. And now we have an ability to tap into that part of the market that have tremendously talented people that choose to live in a remote or different location from where most of us work. And so as cybersecurity leaders, we should take advantage of that and give them that opportunity for remote working environment because it works.
Right. And so we'll go a little bit more into diversity because both of you have touched upon it. But before that, I would love to double click on intellectual curiosity. Jim, you mentioned it. Joe, I've heard that from you many a times as you're building your team. What is intellectual curiosity? How do you define it? What does that mean from your perspective?
It's someone like you. It keeps asking questions. Joe and I'd like to have a conversation, but you keep asking these questions here. That's an indication of intellectual curiosity. And, you know, when somebody asks questions above and beyond kind of the scope of the conversation, pushing the boundaries a bit, that's a great example of kind of quirky behavior that comes with being intellectually curious. The intellectually curious don't wait for someone to ask them to learn. They are constantly learning from multiple sources on multiple subjects, personally and professionally. And that's part of their norm. And you can't change it. That's just inherent in them. And that's why it's so important, because cybersecurity, as Joe and I've talked about, it changes. It changes pretty quickly. And threat actors change their tactics. Our job is to design controls to evolve the way that threat actor tactics are evolving. And that's hard. You're playing catch up doing that. And frankly, intellectually curious people are going to be better at that over the long term than those that aren't.
And if you take a member of one of our teams and looked at what are they doing today, you'll see the need for the intellectual curiosity, because chances are good they're in a meeting with someone else who's the subject matter expert on an area, but we're the one asking them the questions and challenging them and looking for the edge, the issue. You know, they've come up with a grand idea, a new product they want to launch, and they've thought about it for months and months, and we have to show up at a meeting and try and think about the risks. And so if you're not intellectually curious and confident and willing to dig in and ask the hard questions about the edges of what they're working on, you're not going to find the vulnerability or the risk right there. So you need that intellectual curiosity, number one, to be able to push and dig in there, but also because you're context switching so frequently with different people. So you have to zoom in on a set of technologies or a set of people problems and think about them and be curious about them, and then start over again a few days later in a different tech stack with a different person. And if you don't have that, it's going to be pretty hard to do it well. And then layer on top of that what we see over and over in security, The biggest issues are when someone didn't pay attention to a little detail. It's like security, I think of as like trying to fill every hole in a sieve. And if you didn't take the time to make sure you got every single one of them, you have just as big a problem as if you didn't stop any of them.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about diversity, right? Diversity is important to every team because you are bringing different thoughts, you're bringing different ideas, in security team more than others. Would love to hear from your thoughts, like what role does diversity bring in your security teams? And I also know that having spoken to both of you in the past, there's an anecdote that links the two of you when it comes to diversity in terms of your starting conversations, and would love for one of you to share that as well.
Sure, I can do that. So I mentioned earlier that when I was at Facebook in my first CSO role, I did a lot of reaching out and asking people for advice and help. And one time, while on the topic of thinking about the diversity of my team and wanting to improve it, I was speaking with a recruiter, an outside recruiter, and she specialized in diversity recruiting. And I was asking her a bunch of questions, and she said, there's one other CISO out there who asks me the same kind of questions you do, and he's been thinking about this for a long time. Maybe I should connect the two of you. And I said, yeah, that would be great. I would love that. I haven't really connected with another CISO who seems to be digging into this the way my team and I want to right now. And she said, well, let me put you in touch with Jim. And so the first conversation Jim and I ever had, I can vividly remember it. Sitting at a conference room desk at Facebook back in the early 2010s. And we had a long conversation about different aspects of how we were trying to, make sure that our pipelines were diverse, that we were getting our job descriptions right, that we were thinking about making sure that when we brought diverse candidates onto our team, that they would, feel part of the team and welcomed. Just like a really warm, deep conversation. And that's the first time we ever talked.
Yeah, two white guys trying to figure out diversity. But I'll tell you this, though, that conversation changed everything for me. Because Joe asked me a few questions about my techniques, and I really probably conveyed a passion for hiring women. Because at the time, it was probably like 8%, 7 or 8% women in cybersecurity. And it just seemed to me just be an untapped potential, which it still is today. And Joe said, well, how you doing? And I said, well, I'm aggressively, looking to fill every single position with women if I can. But I haven't had a real good conversion rate in terms of the interviews. And I'm wondering what technique you use. And he said, well, your first problem is you're doing the interviews. And I said, wait a minute, why is that a problem? He said, well, the answers that a professional woman's going to give you to your questions are going to differ from the answers that she's going to give another woman. So if you show her a peer that is doing the interviewing, she'll answer questions, differently. And I'm thinking back to myself, I'm saying, when I ask the question of what are your goals for work-life balance, that's very different coming from me versus coming from a woman. And the answers are going to be different. And so I've learned over the years that have people that are actually doing the interviews that are representative of the kind of diversity you want in your organization, and you'll have a much more effective time at attracting more diverse candidates. And Joe was absolutely right. It wasn't, my intent was good, my execution sucked.
Yeah, I remember kind of that conversation, and then it's funny, I was talking about it with my team a couple of years later, and one of the diverse members of my team came up to me afterwards and said, Joe, the other part is we're interviewing you as a company and as a team. And the question that's running through, when I was going through the interview process, when I saw someone who looked like me across the table, I realized I can finally ask the one question of this company that I really want to ask, which is, can someone like me succeed here?
Right.
And it might be someone who's got kids at home, or an elderly family member that they're a caretaker for, or it's the color of their skin, or the way they have an accent, whatever it is. They want to understand, okay, you just showed me 5 people from your team and they all look the same and they all have the same interests and I don't. Like, how am I going to fit in? And are you going to recognize my work equally? That's like, interviews go both ways. We're being interviewed just as much as we are doing interviewing. And we got to give people the opportunity to ask the questions they really want to ask.
That is true. And creating that interview environment where they feel comfortable asking those questions. So that's a really great insight. What other techniques or tactics have you or your team been using when trying to pull in diverse candidates? Because Jim, you mentioned that the conversion rate is not that good, maybe because the pool is not as diverse. So is this other tactics that both of you are using to look at a diverse pool?
Actually, the pool is much more diverse now than it was, a decade or two ago. So that's a good news, and largely because our educational institutions have become much more diverse. And again, that's a positive. I think what I rely on today more than anything else is I try to have a philosophy that's well understood by anybody who's doing interviewing. Because especially early in career professionals or first or second job out of school, they're impressionable, number one. And number two, as Joe mentioned, they're a lot more talented related to cybersecurity today than 10, 15 years ago. So there really is a really diverse, strong talent pool available. But in order to attract them to your enterprise, you have to be willing to teach them, and you have to demonstrate to them that you're willing to teach them what they wish to learn. And if you can do that, you're going to be very successful in the conversion rate. And it's a little bit of a different pitch. It might have been at some point in time, hey, we're really good at cybersecurity and you can be too if you join our team, right? That pitch doesn't resonate as much today. Today it's, what are you interested in learning? And what aspect of this is really interesting to you? And let's line up your opportunity with an opportunity to learn what it is you choose and wish to learn. And that's a very compelling value proposition for the candidate, and it kind of is a philosophy that we should put into action. I'll give you one tangible example of that. When Joe and I started in security, or fell into security, if you can call it that, the most people-intensive and capital-intensive part of cybersecurity was the Security Operations Center. Right. And the SOC analyst goes through an evolution, SOC analyst 1, 2, 3, and so forth, in terms of the level of maturity and the type of work that they do. And the reality is every enterprise that built their own SOC realized that there's burnout. It's hard to look at a screen and say, oh, there's events, and there are always more events than I can do something about. And day in and day out doing the same thing on the same screen, is really brutal. And so today in MassMutual, we use the SOC as our talent engine for the rest of the cybersecurity program. So we hire consciously early in career professionals. We teach them what they wish to learn. And when they want to move to a different program, Joe said software security as an example, or third-party governance, or data protection, or data science, or identity access management, we allow them and actually encourage them to move from the SOC outward to the program. So the programs aren't hiring people externally, they're hiring people from the SOC, and the SOC becomes the engine for talent growth and development. We're both acquiring talent and developing talent. And now we have an engine to feed all of the the needs across the cybersecurity program. At the same time, we're giving people an opportunity to do what it is they want to do, learning what it is they want to learn.
Right. I have one. Time flies when you're having an interesting conversation. So but listening to both of you talk, there's one part that I really thought about, which is not just attracting talent, bring talent in, but also what happens after. So some parts, Jim, you mentioned, but I would love to hear both of you answer this question, that intellectual curiosity means asking a lot of questions. How do you both build an environment within your organizations and team that promotes that asking questions is not a bad thing? Because people coming from a different background often enter a team and go like, am I asking too many questions? Am I asking stupid questions? And they're always trying to gauge things. How do you create that environment? I would love to hear your thoughts there.
Culture really matters. I believe that retaining your talent is just as hard and requires just as much effort as recruiting your talent. And you should put equal time in as a leader to making sure you have the right culture on your team. And it starts with how you model your behaviors in front of your team and what behaviors you recognize and encourage. Security is tough. It's stressful. We're prone to failure. We have an impossible job if the expectation is that we stop everything. And so it's easy for people to get down if you don't celebrate successes, reward people for speaking up and digging in, pointing out things that no one else noticed. And you just have to think about a lot of different ways to do it every day.
Yeah, I agree with Joe, and I think culture is everything. And one example of what we do is we've decoupled the professional development component from performance management. Now, traditional or conventional HR practices would have them interdependent. And what we've done is we've pulled them apart. And the reason we pulled them apart is because I believe that an individual should choose what skill or competency they wish and have the appetite to invest in. I think the leader can provide input like any other input, but it's all that is. That's just input. It's
Right.
not up to the leader to tell the employee what they should want to learn.
Right.
That model has been around in enterprise for 50 years.
Yeah.
When I started in the corporate world, you were told what you were going to learn. You were told when you were going to learn. You went to class to learn these things, and then you were immediately put into a job where you can apply those skills. And that was the model. And you basically, if you were a high performer, your boss looked out for you. And if you weren't a high performer, your boss was finding somewhere else to park you. And that model just has no legs. It's not a sustainable model. Today, professionals at all levels, they want to control their own destiny. They want to influence what direction that they go, and they want flexibility in how they do that. And so our job as leaders is to figure out what it is they want to learn, create an opportunity for them to learn what it is they want to learn, and then to get the hell out of the way.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe a great leader is a great motivator. I really don't. I think a great leader lines up opportunities for individuals to learn what they want to learn, and also delivers some consistent benefits to the organization or the enterprise. And so I'm not trying to motivate anybody. I'm just trying to understand what motivates everyone.
That's great. I could go on for hours picking both of your brains because there's so much more to learn. There's so much more insights that we as a community, we as aspiring security professionals can learn from. But I'll conclude today's conversation here. And I hope that I'll get an opportunity to talk to both of you in a future conversation. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the insights that you have shared. And if you have any last thoughts that you would like to share with the audience or with any security leader, we'll close with that. So I'll start with you, Joe, as a closing note, and then end with Jim.
Yeah, let me just close by saying it's through conversations like this that we all learn. I enjoy speaking with other security leaders and people who aspire to be security leaders, and hope that these types of conversations continue to be helpful for them.
Thanks, Joe. And I'll share that I think it's really hard to be a cybersecurity professional. Joe hit on some of the points earlier on. And there's lots of opportunities for different people to have different perspectives on specific events. And I've always believed, and I was taught that from day one, that our job is to help each other and to help each other be successful. And that creates resiliency across an industry. And that resilience helps all consumers and institutions that benefit. And our job to do that is to share information. And this is an example of that information sharing. Joe has been absolutely instrumental in helping me have some level of achievement in cybersecurity, and I'm very grateful for it.
Thank you both, and thank you for sharing the insights that you both have had, the journey that you have had together. And thank you everyone for tuning in for this episode of Security Spotlight. We'll continue these thought-provoking conversations in the future. Until then, stay tuned, and thanks for your time today.